Okay, are we ready? Well, I have my coffee, so I'm definitely ready. I'm just going to be rambling. This is very much going to be off the cuff and a little bit, stream of consciousness. When I look down, it's because I have a copy of our textbook in front of us. Now, we're starting with 0. Well, I've numbered it 0. It's unnumbered in Levy's original work, the introduction. When you're watching these videos, I did kind of want to mention that you're not going to arrive at the same conclusions that I do. And I think that's very important. You want to bring to this your experiences, your philosophical outlook, your point of view, and use that to interpret what Levy is saying, and of course, Waite's English translation of Levy. But you're not going to necessarily reach the same interpretations or actually go off on the same philosophical tangents that I do. What I pull out of it and what I emphasize with the text might not be what's the most interesting to you. And I really want you to lean into where your own interests and curiosities take you. So don't feel like you're going to come away with the same exact conclusions as I do. The only reason I give my conclusions is to show you one possibility, one scenario of how this book can be, integrated into somebody else's personal practice and belief systems and approach. So that's something that's very important. This course book is going to be about teaching you how to craft a key. You're going to see the theme of key repeating over and over again, and it will all round out at the end, I hope. And so let's get started. Now, introduction, in the beginning, at some point, Eliphas Levi mentions that the chapter numbers are not arbitrary, and it's pretty, it hits you over the head pretty obviously with what it's all about. The two books, Doctrine and Ritual, are each 22 chapters in length, and then if you look at it, other than the unnumbered introduction under Doctrine, chapter 1, 2, 3, all the way down to 22, and chapters 1, 2, 3, and 22 all the way down from in the Doctrine book and in the Ritual book, all align. So, for example, key 6, chapter 6 in Doctrine kind of implies concepts that are going to relate back to key 6, the Lover's card in Tarot, and also chapter 6 in Ritual is going to relate back to the Lover's card in Tarot, and kind of chapter 5 is about the pentagram and relates back to the Hierophant in both Doctrine and Ritual, and so it kind of goes down like that in parallel succession. So when I was starting with the introduction, I don't know where he mentions it in this text, but I do know it was one of the Psalms that comes up in the Key of Solomon, and that was that only the fool says in his heart there is no God. When you are that kind of a fool, you are corrupted and corruptible. And that's actually where I began my thinking about the introduction and just all of this. So I think there was a period in my life when I was very atheistic, and I would have vehemently disagreed with that sentence, because I think culturally that sentence is associated with this idea that you have to believe in a singularity of a monad concept in God, some kind of a monad God, the one true God. And if you don't believe in the one true God or Jesus, then you're a fool. You're corrupted or corruptible. That's what, is sort of the common, and Levy will say profane. He'll continuously use the word profane. The profane takeaway, I think, from that is. And so when I was younger, that's what I assumed that passage meant. And so I vehemently disagreed, especially coming from a more atheistic background. Over the years, and especially through ritual practice and just everything that I've been doing, I now believe in that sentence, hook, line, and sinker, but not necessarily in the same way that the profane do. I think one of the great takeaway points, and that's why I'm starting here, is if you do want to proceed with ritual magic, you have to, it's easiest to stay safe, sorry for lack of a better word, to stay away from being corrupted or corruptible, is if you go in with this profound veneration for the vastness of space-time. And for me, that is divinity. There is something so extraordinary and miraculous. It's just about the whole concept of space-time, beyond our understanding. That, you know, it's that simultaneous recognition that it's all scientific, and yet I can't for the life of me grasp it. And that to me is the wonder of God. And to have that humility is how you can achieve great innovation, achieve great epiphanies in the philosophical fields as well. And in ritual magic, it is what's going to kind of be your guardrails. I think when you, there's two paths, right? Like I think a lot of times when people talk about some of the risks in ritual magic, they're talking about when you start presuming you are God. And that's definitely one path. And it's a powerful path. And I think that is easier for you to lose control. And even in the mundane world, you can see that. Like I think when you arrive at this position of there's no authority figure above you, or you feel like you cannot go, that no one's ever going to challenge your authority, and you're in that kind of a position of power, it's so dangerous. It's so personally dangerous. And you find yourself doing things that a different version of you would never even dream of doing. And that's just the reality. And if you don't believe that, it's probably because you've never achieved that level of power and been that corruptible. So I think always understanding there's a higher authority is a great way to begin ritual magic. So the opening lines of the introduction begin quite ambitiously and broadly. He's making reference to all of these different ancient civilizations and cultures, and he gets very diverse. I found him to be pretty inclusive, and that was very impressive to me. And then he says, what is the one thing all of these different mystery traditions from different parts of the world have in common? And the line that I highlighted is occult philosophy seems to have been the nurse or godmother of all intellectual forces, the key of all divine obscurities. And that's actually the first mention in the book of a key. That theme, the symbology of the key is going to keep on coming up. So I made a notation of that in the margins, and I hope you'll do the same thing. There is space along the right margin for you to make commentary. So here, occult philosophy seems to have been the nurse or godmother of all intellectual forces. I think that is really going to inform how you approach the rest of this book and how you're going to approach transcendental magic. It is something that is going to draw upon all of the different wisdoms, for lack of a better term, using modern words, eclectic. I really do think that's what he's saying. He is kind of saying that it's both eclectic and it's homogeneous. It's both. It is one pure form tradition, but at the same time, it's a pure form tradition that can only stay true if it encapsulates all of the key truths in every other religion. So that concept of the universal religion is what's coming up and what he believes so vehemently in. Just in terms of what personally interested me, when I was reading this, when he's talking about the magic of Zoroaster and Manis, Manichaeism is one of the ancient religions that I just really fixated on. So I had paused here and done a ton of research into Manichaeism and actually checked out a couple of books from the library on that subject matter. It's hard to find, by the way. Manichaeism, I can't believe it's no longer prevalent. It's such an eclectic religion where it brought in Zoroastrianism. It tried to syncretize Buddhism, Christianity, Islam. I don't know if Islam was part of it. Well, definitely Gnosticism, Christianity, and Judaism. No, it is. Yeah, Islam and Buddhism. So I found it fascinating, and it was also heavily rooted in magic. And the reason I was so interested in Manichaeism, because when you read a lot of the 17th and 18th century occult texts, a lot of them, like I kept seeing references to Manichaeism over and over again, or the prophet Mani. And I never took the time to, pause what I was doing and learn more about it when I didn't know anything about this religion. So it just kind of I just glossed over it every single time. But it really comes up in so many of these old texts. And so it was with Levi's work that I find that, wow, this is like the millionth time that I saw a reference to Manichaeism in one of these old occult grimoires texts on the occult sciences. So I felt like, why does every single occultist bring up this religion that is basically now extinct? And I see why, because it was about, one, it was about looking for a universal theology that tried to syncretize and bring together all of the prevailing religions of the time. It was considered Gnostic, it is considered heretical, and that's kind of why it was wiped out. And two, it worked very heavily with ritual magic, especially the planetary spirits, the sacred seven. And so I think all of that intuitively are concepts that the occultist is drawn to. So I definitely see why it was so big for us. Now, I think one of the great takeaway points from chapter 0, the introduction, is when Levi mentions that there are 3 sacred books. And I do want to point out, I don't think we need to necessarily, but there are always going to be people, I think, especially in the 21st century, who want to see inclusivity and are always understanding of historical context. So you have to kind of know where he's coming from. So he is coming from a Abrahamic background, and he's very much well read in the Bible and biblical theory, and that's really where he draws most of his metaphors and mythology from. And he says there are 3 sacred books that have the universal truth in it. The first is the book of Ezekiel from the Old Testament. The second is the book of Revelation. And the third, he doesn't tell us. He never comes outright and say. And that's kind of where I had a point of confusion. So there are places that it seems very clear he's making reference to the tarot, and he's saying the tarot is the 3rd sacred book. And there are other places where he seems to say it's the Key of Solomon, and the Key of Solomon is that 3rd sacred book. And as we get to some of the references throughout the chapters, I'll point out or try to pull out why I inferred that. And so I was really confused. Like, sometimes it seems like he's talking about the tarot as book 3, and then sometimes he's talking about the Key of Solomon. But then at the same time, he also kind of merges the two and conflates the Key of Solomon with the tarot. And you'll see a couple of points where he does that as well. I'm just like, what? He thinks this is the what? And so that's interesting as well, where now I'm not sure when book 3, is it the Key of Solomon or is it the tarot? Anyway, that's something I wanted to highlight. In the text, even though it's the main body, whenever you see bold-faced passages, I hope you will read that a couple of times. That's actually my own edits. I edited it by putting things that really struck me in boldface, hoping that it's something that you will pay a closer attention to, slow down your reading, or reread a couple of times and think about before you move on. And so that's the main takeaway point that I found from this chapter, was that idea of the 3 sacred books. And the thing is, if you are into the esoteric study of the tarot, Ezekiel, Revelations, and Key of Solomon, if the 3rd book is the Key of Solomon, do play in heavily in terms of the symbology that you will find in the tarot, esoteric renderings of the tarot, not the original Marseille or the original playing card tarot, but like the occult derivatives and interpretations of tarot really, really heavily emphasize those iconographies. Another thing I hope you're going to look at when you read this chapter is the 2 questions that he poses, that he answers for you, but before you read his answer, I hope you'll answer it for yourself. And the 2 questions that he pushes you to answer for yourself is, 1, what exactly is magical power and occult knowledge? What is that? What is it that you're even studying? Like, what is the subject matter that you're saying that you're studying right now? What is magical power and occult knowledge? I think that's fascinating. And remember earlier he said the secret to happiness was to attain power and to know the secrets of the universe. And so that's occult knowledge. So basically magical power and occult knowledge, he answers sort of in an indirect, roundabout way as being the keys to happiness. And then the second question is there a sacred mystery that you can learn which will empower you to perform miracles? He answers obviously, yes to both questions, but that is something, before you just answer quickly with a affirmative or negative statement, really think about, the implications of those two questions. And I think that's very important. And then he gets into this section where he subdivides the Hebrew alphabet into 3 sections, the 3 septenaries here. Well, 3 septenaries plus extra, because it's 22 letters, so 21 is 3. So it's a 3 septenaries plus, right? And he corresponds each of the Hebrew letters with one of the powers and privileges of Solomonic magic. And here he's saying the occultist is someone who, this is sort of like his list of objectives, or his mission statement, as it were, where you're going to hold the almond branch as a magical wand in one hand and the key of Solomon in your other hand. And when you pursue this kind of a path, these are the 22 powers and privileges that the magist will attain. And he gets into what that means. So here I kind of found he's suggesting that the third book, third sacred text, is the Key of Solomon, but then he presents it in a structure that conforms with the tarot. So that was something I found interesting that I can't fully wrap my head around. Here, this chapter, he's also talking about the whole, he really structures this book phenomenally well. In the introduction, he lays out the roadmap of why you're even reading this book. Like, what's the point in struggling through this obscure text? And he says it really is about the achievement of your 5 great works, the 5 achievements of your great work. So your great work is cyclical as well. It isn't this one thing. I think that's fascinating. It's one thing is your great work, but at the same time, from your vantage point, it's not one thing. So get out of the mindset of, is this one great thing that I'm going to achieve? You're one great masterpiece. It's actually a chain, a magical chain of achievements, and all together, collectively as a whole, it is going to be your great work. And that's one way to start thinking about that for yourself. Another line I really liked in this chapter: Psyche is the sister of Eve, or rather, is Eve spiritualized? I can't pretend I understand what that means. I spent a lot of time thinking about that one sentence, and one of the reasons it took me so long to get through this book is because I paused and I took so many breaks from this book. Like I said, it was during the annotations and working through chapter 0, the introduction, is when I had to sort of leave this project to undertake this project, the Key of Solomon. So, you can see I took huge pauses in between. And then I didn't get back to this book till this entire thing was finished. And then just so many breaks. And one of the big breaks that I took was when I got to that sentence. Like, I stopped. I just full dead stop here and just couldn't move on because I didn't understand that sentence. It's weird. Intuitively, somewhere in your gut, for me at least, I understood it, and it rang true for me. The metaphors that he was using, the mythologies that he was bringing in, the concepts behind the mythologies, sort of built together as he assembled together the way he did, made perfect sense to me. Psyche is the sister of Eve, or rather, is Eve spiritualized? I won't give my explanation because I don't think it's perfected yet, and I think it's right now it's still subject to change. I don't think I have something that even I'm satisfied with. I can dismantle my own beliefs at this point, so I don't want to talk too much about what I think it is, but I do challenge you to think about what that sentence means to you. Now, one of the great things about working through these 12 chapters is it's a very tried and true methodical process for you to discern for yourself the great secrets. And I think this, working through these 12 chapters, absolutely does that for you. And one of the first places it begins is when you read the passage, the great magical secret is, therefore, the lamp and dagger of Psyche, the apple of Eve, the sacred fire of Prometheus, and he goes on and on and on. But then he also says it's both the burning scepter of Lucifer and the holy cross of the Redeemer. Here he's saying knowledge is the great magical secret. And you're going to see that theme driven home throughout the chapters as well, where he really pushes the candidate who seeks to know the mysteries. You have to know. You have to know so much. And I think that can be a huge stumbling block for people in this day and age. People kind of want instant gratification. If it's not something you can Google and get a 3-sentence pithy answer for, you don't really want to pursue. And that is one of the great unfortunate realities of our time, which I got the sense, wasn't uncommon in his time either, because he makes a lot of references like, oh, nobody really wants to deep dive into this subject matter. So he's kind of lamenting about the same thing, and this was the 1850s. So I don't think we've changed much as a society. There's always going to be the lot of us who wants the easy answers the easy way. But the path of the occultist will never be easy. And here he's talking about the revelation of the magical secret requires a lot of knowledge. So it's not in the knowledge that you're going to be learning. So it's not going to be in the quadrivium, like when you're learning astronomy and astrology, when you're learning numbers and sacred geometry, when you're learning all of these different subject matters, when you're learning different mythologies, reading different sacred texts. The knowledge, the magical secret is not necessarily in that, but it's the sum of all of that. So you cannot achieve knowledge of the great secret until you have attained every piece of the puzzle. And that's kind of insane. It's kind of daunting, but I don't know. I'm thrilled by that. The other thing that I find philosophically mind-blowing is just the passage right after what I was talking about. Everything is contained in a single word, which consists of 4 letters. It is the tetragram of the Hebrews, the Azoth of the alchemists, the Thoth of the Bohemians, or the tarot of the Kabbalists. By the way, I think he uses the word Kabbalist a little bit differently from my understanding of the word in today's time. You'll see. He uses the word a little bit differently if you look at the context clues. But anyway, it seems to sometimes be used synonymously, exactly synonymously with mystic. So, Kabbalism is Jewish mysticism, but he uses it synonymously with just mysticism, period, which is interesting. I think there's so much in that sentence because, one, it goes back to that idea that I was saying earlier. The fool is the person who believes there is no God, who declares there is no God. And I think here, to buy into what he's saying here, that everything is contained in a single word, first, you need to believe in that higher divinity, that oneness. And that oneness has within it 4 sub-identities that are brought together. And it's the 4 elements, the 4 directions, this concept of the 4 that creates the order of the material work. And it's also the tarot. If you look at the tarot, that is very much sort of the structure, the elemental basis of the tarot, right? You have the 4 elements. And so I think that's fascinating that so much can be inferred out of that one passage, because it is the 4 letters, Yod He Vav He, and that's a very simple way of putting it. It's the concept of divinity, of a holy oneness in divinity that has 4 sub-identities and 4 worlds and 4 manifestations that are the building blocks of the universe. But within that one statement, that divinity, it's so complex and multi-layered. And I think that is the magical secret that you're going to start to unravel. Now, you often hear people ask, well, do you need to study the Kabbalah to understand Western occultism? And then even more specifically among, tarot enthusiasts, do you need to study the Kabbalah to understand the tarot? And all I will say is, within this text, Levi seems to answer that question in the affirmative. So you will read right here in the introduction, and he makes reference to it throughout his texts. He does set up the view here right now in the introduction that the Kabbalah is imperative to understanding the concepts of transcendental magic, that you can't understand the magical agent without understanding the Kabbalah. I would actually tend to agree with him. But I would expand upon that. I think it's the Kabbalah, and I think what I've noticed actually about a lot of Kabbalists is Jewish Kabbalists is that they find their way into Taoism, and people who are deeply entrenched in the study of Taoism and the I Ching find their way to the Kabbalah. So these two groups, weirdly enough, find their way to each other. I've seen this just as a pattern, a recurring pattern I've seen among Kabbalists and also Taoists. And I think that's because as I study these two, they're actually both saying the same thing. Like, they really are. And I think if you have a deep understanding of one of those, and then you enter the study of the other, you pick up the other relatively quickly. It doesn't feel as dense and obscure as other people make it out to be, because you already have a foundational understanding of it. They both arrive at the same core truths, which is fascinating. And so I just want to sort of throw that out there. Do you need to study the Kabbalah to understand Western occultism and ritual magic? I think it's a great thing to have under your belt, And I found that the deeper I go in my studies of it, the stronger I personally answer for myself, yes. And that's because why does it have so much crossover with the I Ching? Why does the I Ching have so much crossover with the Kabbalah? There has to be something there. And so that's why I like to study both, because by studying both, I can distill the two down to a common denominator, and that goes back to the Prisca Theologia.